A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms is Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad to be with you today. A day in which a lot of us are taking a look back at the presidential debate last night. 10 Democratic candidates up on stage on CNN. You've got 10 more coming this evening, and as was expected, gun control was a topic of discussion last night. It wasn't the first topic of discussion. You had questions about Medicare for all, and I thought there was a decent question asked by Jake Tapper. I'll get into that in just a little bit, but when it comes to the gun control questions, unfortunately, there really weren't any decent questions. There were questions that allowed for the candidates to offer up their soundbite solutions without really delving into, okay, how is this program going to actually work? Case in point, Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, South Bend, Indiana, who got off on this riff about prohibition. While he's talking up his support for gun control laws, talks about changing the Constitution. Says, this is a country that once changed its Constitution so you couldn't drink and changed it back because we changed our minds. You're telling me we can't reform our democracy in our time? We have to, or we will be having the same argument 20 years from now. What does that even mean exactly? So, yeah, with the 18th Amendment, the United States Constitution changed, and it prohibited the sale and possession of spirituous liquids. And then with the 21st Amendment, they repealed it because it turned out to be an awful, awful idea. So that means that we should, what exactly? Get rid of the Second Amendment so we could put it back like 12 years from now when we realize what an awful idea it was to get rid of the Second Amendment? That's not really a great pro-gun control message on the part of Mayor Pete. Although perhaps what he is saying is that, listen, we should go big. We should be talking about changing the Constitution, changing our right to keep and bear arms, or else he says we're going to keep having this debate 20 years from now. You know what's interesting is we weren't having this debate 20 years ago about changing the Constitution, and our violent crime rate was a lot higher 20 years ago than it is today. In fact, violent crimes declined by about half since the early 1990s, which was not something that any of the candidates brought up on stage last night. You also had John Hickenlooper, former governor of Colorado. And John Hickenlooper, when it comes to gun control, his strategy is talk about how he took on the NRA when he was the governor there in Colorado. So this is a part of what he said last night. He said, I beat the NRA. Says it's time for a leader who knows how to get stuff done instead of just talking about it. So what exactly did John Hickenlooper get done there in Colorado? Well, in 2013, John Hickenlooper managed to shepherd through on very partisan lines. In fact, I don't believe there was a single Republican that voted in favor of these bills. Several gun control bills. There was a magazine ban on magazines over 20 rounds. That led to Magpul pulling out of Colorado. There was the quote-unquote universal background check legislation as well. And interestingly enough, neither one of those things has really accomplished what John Hickenlooper was hoping for, or at least what he said the goal was. Now, if the goal of passing this legislation was, hey, you know what, I got to say I took on the NRA and I beat them, I guess then John Hickenlooper got his accomplishments. But if the goal was to improve public safety, Hickenlooper failed, without a doubt, because violent crime has gone up, not down, in Colorado since the passage of those gun control laws. In fact, it was just a few months ago, Denver Post reported that in 2018, Denver, Colorado, had the fastest growing violent crime rate of any large American city. That's after John Hickenlooper took on and beat the NRA. Violent crime has gone up, not down. Garen Winnemute, who is an anti-gun researcher at University of California, Davis, came out with a study last year showing that when the universal background check law was put on the books in Colorado, it didn't lead to more background checks. But again, violent crime has gone up. So Hickenlooper, again, sticking to his talking points, and Jake Tapper and none of the other moderators there at CNN knew enough about this. I think they did not know to follow up John Hickenlooper's statement. Well, Governor, listen, you say you beat the NRA, but you haven't beaten violent crime because things have gotten worse in your state since then. That would have been a perfect follow-up. We didn't hear it. Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana, kind of going for the Jim Webb constituency, I guess, which I think has shrunk, by the way, since Jim Webb was a Democratic candidate 4 years ago. I don't know who he's actually hoping to appeal to in the Democratic primary, but he was asked, okay, so Governor, you opposed a quote-unquote assault weapons ban. You recently changed your mind. Now you support it. Why? And he didn't really answer the question. He talked about how a nephew, this is a personal issue for him, a nephew was killed in a shooting, but he didn't talk specifically about the flip-flopping on his support for a quote-unquote assault weapons ban, leading to that, because of that tragedy in his family. And in fact, he very quickly got away from any discussion about the Second Amendment and instead went into a discussion about the First Amendment, talking about, well, what we need to do is we need to get dark money out of politics. He actually said in response to this question about semi-automatic firearm bans, he said, if we can kick the Koch brothers out of Montana, we can do it everywhere. I'm old enough to remember then when we weren't supposed to talk about kicking Americans out of places, but I guess that was last week. And Beto O'Rourke and a couple of the other Democratic candidates followed suit, said, yeah, we got to get the money out of politics, man. It's the big money that's it's buying influence and it's buying votes and it's buying access. That was from Beto. Not one of these candidates. And by the way, the NRA was all the boogeyman, right? Amy Klobuchar, we got to take on the NRA. Beto O'Rourke, it's the NRA's money. Do you know who outspent the NRA in 2018? And do you know who is likely going to outspend the NRA in 2020? Gun control groups. Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, current billionaire, founder of Everytown for Gun Safety, plans on spending $500 million in the 2020 election cycle to promote candidates who are going to be stumping for the very same gun control laws that we saw these candidates stumping for on stage last night. And I don't think you'll hear any of those 10 that we heard last night, nor do I think you'll hear any of the 10 we'll hear this evening mention anything about getting Bloomberg's money out of politics. It's not big money that they want to get out of politics. It's not dark money that they want to get out of politics. It's your money that they want to get out of politics. And it's your voice that they want to get out of politics. They're fine with an anti-gun billionaire spending $500 million of his own cash to support candidates that will go after your rights. But if you and several 100,000 or several million of your fellow gun owners want to pool your resources to try and counter the message of that anti-gun billionaire, those Democratic candidates are going to be there to say, no, you can't. That somehow that is a perversion of the First Amendment and the freedom of speech to speak with one voice on one issue. So I do suspect, again, we'll hear another question or two about gun control efforts during the second night of the two-part Democratic debate. One of the things that I would like to see from the CNN anchors, I mentioned at the beginning of the program that Jake Tapper actually asked a pretty good question when it came to Medicare for all. The question was a simple one, and to be sure, the candidates avoided answering it, but the question was a good one. It was, do you support raising taxes on the middle class in order to pay for Medicare for all? And Jake Tapper went on to elaborate. He said, listen, I know that you won't be paying your insurance premiums anymore. This is how the theory goes. You won't be paying your insurance premiums anymore. So it's okay if your taxes go up to pay for medical costs, because in the end, it's a wash. But do you support raising taxes on the middle class in order to pay for Medicare? A couple of candidates came out and said, no, I don't do that at all. Many more danced around the issue because they didn't want to say, yeah, yeah, we're going to raise taxes on the middle class, but those taxes are going to go directly towards their medical care. So it's all good. It's all even in the end. That's not a good soundbite for those politicians. So a question I would love to see Jake Tapper or Dana Bash or any of the other moderators that are going to be on hand tonight ask these candidates when it comes to gun control is, are you willing to build more federal prison spaces to enforce the new federal gun control laws that you want to put on the books? Because right now, throughout the entirety of the federal prison system, there are about 30,000 Americans who are behind bars at the federal level on not just weapons offenses, but weapons, explosives, arson offenses, about 30,000. We've got about 100 million legal gun owners in this country. And the Democrats' proposals, from gun licensing to gun bans to magazine bans, would turn the vast majority of those 100 million Americans into criminals overnight if they did not comply. And we've seen in states like New York and New Jersey that there is not and has not been a lot of compliance with things like quote unquote a Sullivan's registration, turning in your magazines or getting rid of them in order to comply with the magazine ban. In New York, there are hundreds of thousands of pistol owners right now who were supposed to re-register their pistol. They've already registered with the state once, but they're supposed to re-register their pistol back in 2018. Deadline was like end of January 2018. Again, somewhere around 750,000 New Yorkers hadn't done so. Governor Cuomo said, well, we're not gonna go out and round anybody up. We're gonna give people another year to go ahead and comply with the law. So years gone by. It's now January 2019. Cuomo just drops the topic. The media doesn't pick up on the topic in New York. State police don't mention the topic. They just sort of let that one go. It's another aspect of the New York SAFE Act that is really not being enforced unless, they pick up somebody on another violent offense, and that's an additional charge that they could hit them with. So how do you propose to enforce these laws? Are you prepared to dramatically increase the number of federal prison beds in order to deal with any possible non-compliance? And again, what would the penalties be for violating all of these proposed gun laws? You talk a lot about putting these laws on the books, but you don't talk about how you would enforce them. Not one candidate actually said, yeah, okay, so you know what? We need to ban these battlefield weapons of war that are on American streets. And if you're caught with one, we're sending you to prison for 5 years. Not one of them said, or even said, listen, we're going to ban these battlefield weapons of war, but we're not going to send anybody to prison for it. If we find you with one of these guns, we're going to fine you $10,000 or $1,000 or give you a slap on the wrist. That part of the equation didn't even factor into a single candidate's answer, nor did it factor into a single moderator's question. And that, to me, was what was most disappointing about the debate last night, is that we got a very facile covering of the issue. You didn't have moderators asking pointed questions. You certainly didn't have any candidates offering any sort of pointed responses. It was very, very surface level. It was very superficial. Soundbite solutions were offered and accepted by the moderators. There was a bit of a back and forth between candidates about, who's the most anti-gun, but there really isn't much daylight between these candidates in terms of the gun control proposals that they support. There was not a single candidate on stage who said, hey, I've been listening to this for the last couple of minutes, and I just got to say, some of these ideas are crazy. Some of these ideas are absolutely insane. You're talking about banning quote-unquote assault weapons. What is that? New York's definition is different than California's definition, which is different than Washington State's definition, which is different than Florida's definition, which is different than Washington, D.C.'s definition. I don't even know what guns we're talking about here. Are you talking about banning all semi-automatic rifles? Do you know how many of those there are in this country? This is crazy. Let's talk about some real common sense solutions. That didn't happen last night either. No candidate found a gun control proposal objectionable, nor will they. In fact, I think they need to pace themselves, honestly, because we're still, several months away from the first votes taking place in the Democratic primaries, and they're already getting to the point where, again, you saw Pete Buttigieg casually reference the 18th and 21st Amendments to the U.S. Constitution in terms of the gun control debate. And hey, why can't we just experiment? Why can't we maybe take the Second Amendment off the table? We can always put it back in a decade later, if that's what we want to do. It was just, it was bizarre. All right, so normally we do an interview here on Cam and Company. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I did do an interview today. It was a good one. It was a really good one, but I screwed up. I mentioned on Monday that I'm learning new things here in terms of how to put a show together. I'm kind of flying solo, and I still don't know exactly what happened, but the interview that I did got saved as a file that I can't play back. So the good news is we're going to talk with Sheriff Tony Mays from Cibola County, New Mexico on Friday's Cam and Company. The bad news is we're not talking with him today. But we do have our armed citizen story. We have our good deed of the day. We also have our plea bargain of the day. And, actually, let's talk about the plea bargain of the day, because this, I think, relates to the topic of gun control. And again, what we did not hear candidates talk about during the Democratic debate last night. So this story comes from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Gunman in Hot Springs waiting for mental health treatment. So this is an individual who, over the weekend, there in Hot Springs, Arkansas, ended up getting involved in a shooting with a law enforcement officer. And as it turns out, this guy has been known to authorities. Jonathan Allen Scott is his name. According to Fox 18 or Fox 16, he's now in the hospital, mental health being called into question. He's got a lengthy criminal history that spans more than a decade, according to authorities. All of them misdemeanor charges. But he was also apparently on a wait list to get into a mental health facility at the time of this shooting over the weekend. According to court records from a few months ago, Fox 16 reports, Scott was supposed to meet with a company regarding inpatient treatment after one of his recent arrests. But as of May 24th, 2019, they were still looking to place him for inpatient care. So again, here's somebody that we know needs help. We know he needs help. He's got a decade of petty offenses leading to, repeated small jail stints, but apparently no real access to mental health services. And back in May, we said, all right, we got to get this guy in a facility. Outpatient treatment's not going to be enough. Get him to a therapist once a week. That's not going to be enough. He needs to be inpatient for a while. This is getting serious now. That was back on May 24th. It's now the end of July. And he was still out on the streets. Fox 16 spoke with Pat McCabe, who's the president and CEO of Levi Hospital in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And he said it's a very difficult situation. He says short-term services, I think we're doing pretty good at. Long-term services, he says, are an area that we need to address. Fox 16 also spoke with Dr. Rob Gershon, who's a psychologist with the Ouachita Behavioral Health and Wellness, the company that was supposed to process Scott for inpatient intake. And he says that there are not enough inpatient beds across the state of Arkansas for the growing number of patients who need this type of care. He adds that incidents like this one are more likely to happen when you have gaps in services. So, the Democratic candidates last night, all about the gun control laws. Beto O'Rourke conflated firearm-related suicides with firearm-related homicides in order to increase the number of firearm-related deaths in this country, as if it's just one problem. Whether you're murdered with somebody who's armed with a gun, or you commit suicide with a firearm, or with a rope, or with carbon monoxide. Again, that's a gun control issue for Beto O'Rourke. This story out of Hot Springs, Arkansas is not a gun control issue, even though there was a firearm involved. This is a mental health issue. If you talk about crises in this country, violent crime, again, down by almost half since the early 1990s. Typically, when something is going down, we don't call it an epidemic or a crisis. That's generally good news, right? What is going up, the number of suicides in this country. What is going up are the number of individuals who do need access to those inpatient mental health services and can't get them. That's the crisis, or at least that's a bigger crisis than the thankfully falling violent crime rate in this country. Now, look, crime's still around, right? Not going to pretend that it's not. As a matter of fact, we've got a armed citizen story to talk about out of Alabama, Limestone County, Alabama, WAAY. According to Steve Young with the Limestone County Sheriff's Office, Timothy Jackson, arrested Tuesday night, charged with burglary after he was shot during a home invasion last week. Now, he was arrested, as it turns out, at a local hospital there in Alabama after he was shot by the homeowner. The sheriff says that Jackson, already out on bond for a previous drug offense, so he will not now be able to bond out until he goes before a judge. Deputies say that Jackson broke into a home on Nick Davis Road last week while the homeowner was asleep. The homeowner woke up, hearing a noise, saw a light was on. When he went into the room to see what was going on, he saw Jackson rifling through his things. The homeowner and Jackson, according to WAAY, got into a scuffle before the homeowner shot him. So again, crime still happens. Not denying that it doesn't. But again, thankfully, we're seeing fewer and fewer violent crimes, and frankly, more and more armed citizens as well who are able to protect themselves. Now, our good deed today from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where a police officer going above and beyond to help out an autistic child, KOAA, reporting on this story from the Springs area in Colorado. And this is an officer who has known this autistic child for a while now. His name is Hunter. And Hunter apparently likes to take off. He likes to leave his house without telling his mom. And Allie Steinhardt, who's an officer with the Colorado Springs Police Department, said he's been found wandering all over the place. He's just adventurous. She said the calls have been coming in about Hunter since before she started as an officer there in September of last year, but she said she noticed them occurring more frequently, starting in about February. She said we're getting calls maybe once a week, more. Allie Steinhardt is a softball coach for the Special Olympics. She says she has a soft spot in her heart for individuals with special needs. So she spent hours looking for Hunter while she was on the job, and she would go home and she'd be thinking about him. And she decided, I want to see if there's something out there that could help Hunter and his family. She said, I kind of used my connections with the Special Olympics and online, other agencies to try to find out how we could best help him. And she found a company called Angel Sense, which is designed for people with special needs and actually can track them. I suppose you could have some helicopter parents who would use this on, every kid of theirs, but it's designed for kids like Hunter. Allie Steinhardt says they're made specifically for kids like Hunter and adults. They have a lot of good features. It's got live stream tracking. A parent can track it on an app on their phone and able to see where he is right away. So Officer Steinhardt reached out to the company. They offered the family a 30-day trial for free. She said that Angel Sense was, quote, even more kind to say, hey, if this works for the family and if this is something that they want to keep using, we're going to waive the device fee. So they just have this monthly payment. She worked with the Department of Human Services and Resource Exchange to try to help with the monthly fee, but Steinhardt says ultimately the mom decided to pay that monthly fee by herself. But again, using her own resources, on her own time to try to come up with a better solution for this family, for Hunter, and for the police department as well. Wednesday night of last week, when KOA reported on this story, Hunter wandered again from his home and wasn't wearing the device there. Officer Steinhardt says he was found safely, but he doesn't really like wearing his device. It's in the form of a belt right now. They're going to try to change it up, maybe make it a bracelet, see if that helps. So again, not a perfect solution, but something that has been working better. Allie Steinhardt says, it makes me sleep better at night. I'm not worrying about him as much, just making sure that he is safe. So in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Officer Allie Steinhardt there in Colorado Springs, Colorado, we thank you for your good deed today. And that is, unfortunately, all of the show that we have for you here on this edition of Cam and Company. Tomorrow, if I don't screw things up, we're going to be talking with J. Eric Dietz, who is at the Homeland Security Institute at Purdue University and has been doing a lot of research into quote-unquote large capacity magazines. Again, no shortage of politicians on the debate stage running for president saying, oh, nobody needs these magazines. Ban these magazines. You've got the magazine ban in New Jersey that was just upheld by the Third Circuit. You got the magazine ban in California that's currently undergoing litigation. And you know that no matter where you live, handgun politicians are going to be pushing a magazine ban in your next legislative session. I live in Virginia. Governor Ralph Northam is pushing one right now. We've got elections this year. And if anti-gun activists have their way, they'll be putting a magazine ban just like California's and New Jersey's in place in Virginia in just a few months. Here's the problem. According to the research that Eric Dietz has been doing there at the Homeland Security Institute, homeowners who actually have and can use magazines of 30 rounds during a home invasion to protect themselves improve their survivability. In fact, not only do they improve their survivability doubles in some home invasions. So you want to talk again about why does anybody need one of these magazines? Perhaps because they want to stay alive. And we'll get into that discussion with Eric Dietz from the Homeland Security Institute at Purdue University on the next edition of Cam and Company. We thank you again for tuning in today. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Make sure you spread the word. You can subscribe at YouTube to Town Hall Media, and we will be back again in the very near future with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information right here on Bearing Arms' Cam and Company.